When you've known someone for years, you think you can trust them. You believe they're one of the good ones, the person who will always be there for you. But sometimes, you don't truly know someone until you're deep in a relationship with them. This is my story, the story of how I went from being friends with someone I thought I knew to being trapped in an emotionally abusive relationship. And the journey of how I found my way out, little by little, with the help of therapy and the support of others who've been through the same. Welcome to Fractured Bonds, where every story reveals a deeper truth. We had been friends for many years before we started dating. Our friend group supported the idea of us being together, and it seemed like a natural next step. I thought I knew him, and honestly, I thought he was one of the nice guys. When he confessed that he had feelings for me, I decided to give the relationship a chance. After all, why wouldn't I? He was my friend, and I trusted him. For the first year and a half, things seemed fine. We enjoyed each other's company, shared similar interests, and our relationship appeared to be progressing normally. But deep down, something always felt a bit off. There were moments I couldn't quite place, subtle red flags I brushed aside. It wasn't until we moved across the country and got engaged that everything began to unravel. After we got engaged, he accepted his dream job in a small rural town in Virginia, and we left Washington behind. Moving to a town with only 200 people was a huge adjustment for me. I had no support system, no job, and no way to maintain my independence. I thought I was being a supportive partner by following him, but it turned out that the move left me completely isolated. Once we settled into our new life, his true colors began to show. One of the first things I noticed was his lack of hygiene. He didn't use deodorant, rarely washed his hair, and didn't brush his teeth regularly. It affected our intimacy. I found myself pulling back because of how off-putting it was, but that only led to bigger problems. When our intimacy began to wane, his behavior took a darker turn. He began pressuring me into physical intimacy, even when I wasn't in the mood. I would say no, but he would persist, often using guilt and manipulation to wear me down. On the rare occasions that I stood my ground, he would retreat to the bathroom and engage in behavior that made me feel deeply uncomfortable, all the while blaming me for his actions. This wasn't just about physical coercion, it was emotional manipulation too. He used every opportunity to make me feel like I was the one at fault, the one who wasn't being a good partner. Over time, I began to feel trapped not just physically but mentally. Our arguments became more frequent, and with every fight, his anger grew. I have PTSD from a previous relationship, and during these fights, I would retreat to the bathroom to calm down. The bathroom door didn't have a lock, so I would sit on the floor and brace my back against it, holding it shut as best I could. Instead of giving me the space I needed, he would throw his weight against the door, trying to force his way in. He never physically hit me, but he didn't need to. The threat of his size and strength was enough to intimidate me. It was emotional abuse, and I didn't realize just how deeply it was affecting me until much later. In rural Virginia, I had no one. No job, no friends, no support network. I was completely isolated, both physically and emotionally. I felt trapped in a life that didn't feel like my own anymore. I began to lose myself, sinking into depression and hopelessness. The turning point came when I finally reached my breaking point. My mental health had deteriorated so much that I couldn't function. I called my parents in Washington, and they arranged for me to come home to see my psychiatrist. I told him the trip was just temporary, but once I was home, I knew I couldn't go back. Once I returned home, I ended the relationship. But it took me years to fully understand what had happened. I had repressed so many details of the abuse, and it wasn't until I started therapy that I began to unpack the trauma. My therapist helped me realize that I had been in an emotionally abusive relationship, and that I had been manipulated for far longer than I had allowed myself to acknowledge. In our hometown, people still see him as the charming, lovable guy. He's been called a big teddy bear, and it makes me sick knowing how far from the truth that is. I've even heard that I'm not the only ex he treated this way. It's hard to move on when the world sees him as something he's not. My therapist believes he might be a covert narcissist, and while I've made progress in therapy, healing is slow. Some days, I wonder if I'll ever stop feeling anger and resentment for what he did to me. But I also know that I deserve to move forward, and I'm working on finding peace, one step at a time. One user shared a heartfelt message, saying, "I'm so sorry for everything you've endured, but I'm happy you escaped that terrible situation. The best revenge is to be unlike him who hurt you." I was in a similar situation, and it took me almost a decade to realize how toxic my relationship was. From one crazy ex to another, I wish you healing and mental peace. I responded, "Thank you for the kind words. I'm glad I got out before marrying him." It's crazy how long it takes to recognize abuse. At the time of the breakup, I felt so guilty for leaving him, not realizing the harm I had endured. Another user commented, "It took me almost a year of therapy to start uncovering my own trauma. It's hard, but we need to accept that others' perception of us isn't reality." We continued to talk, reflecting on how long the healing process can take and how repressed memories can resurface, causing fresh waves of pain. I told them, "You can't recover from what you can't remember," a sentiment my therapist echoed. The road to recovery is long, and I'm still on it. I struggle with PTSD from the relationship, and it's impacted my ability to trust other people. But I'm working on it, bit by bit. I know that I was a victim, but that doesn't define me. I can heal, and I will heal. I may never forgive him for what he did, and that's okay. What's important is that I'm focusing on myself, on my emotional growth, and on rebuilding my sense of self. I've come a long way, and I know that the future holds hope, healing, and peace. With this, the story comes to an end, but the journey doesn't stop here. Thank you for exploring the stories that shape us. If you enjoyed this one, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content like this. See you again soon.